Paralyzed little girl secretly gives a rescue signal. Police officer notices and follows them home. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The autumn morning felt like any other for Officer Daniel Bridgewater as he pulled into Murphy's Corner gas station for his routine patrol check. 20 years on the force had taught him to notice details others missed, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to witness. Daniel stepped out of his patrol car, adjusting his badge as the familiar scent of gasoline and fresh coffee filled the air. The small town of Millbrook rarely saw excitement, which was exactly how he liked it. At 35, Daniel had seen enough chaos in the big city before transferring here 5 years ago, seeking the peace that only small-town life could offer. That's when he saw her. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, sat in a wheelchair near the station's entrance. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore a faded pink sweater that had seen better days. But it wasn't her appearance that caught Daniel's attention. It was her eyes. Those deep blue eyes held a sadness that no child should ever carry. Standing beside her was a man in his 40s, Marcus Thornfield, whose nervous energy immediately put Daniel on alert. Marcus kept checking his watch and glancing around as if expecting trouble. His clothes were wrinkled, and there was something about the way he hovered over the little girl that felt off. "Come on, Emily, we need to go," Marcus said, his voice carrying an edge of impatience that made Daniel's protective instincts flare. That's when it happened. Emily Rose Carter lifted her small hand, and with deliberate, careful movements, made a gesture that sent chills down Daniel's spine. It was subtle, so subtle that most people would miss it entirely. But Daniel recognized it immediately. Years ago, during a police training seminar on child safety, he'd learned about silent signals, ways children could ask for help when they couldn't speak. The little girl was asking for help. Emily's tear-filled eyes met Daniel's for just a moment before she quickly looked away, her hand falling back to her lap as Marcus began pushing her wheelchair toward a beat-up blue sedan. The tears on her cheeks glistened in the morning sunlight, but she made no sound. Not a whimper, not a word. Daniel's heart began racing as memories he'd tried to bury surfaced. His younger sister Rebecca's face flashed in his mind. The same helpless expression, the same silent plea for help that he'd failed to recognize 20 years ago. He'd been just 15 then, too young to understand the signs, too young to save her, but he wasn't 15 anymore. "Excuse me," Daniel called out, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "Is everything all right over here?" Marcus froze for a split second before turning around with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, hello, officer. Yes, everything's fine. Just getting my Emily here ready for our trip to visit her grandmother." Something in the way Marcus hesitated before saying Emily's name made Daniel's radar ping even louder. The little girl sat perfectly still in her wheelchair, staring down at her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't looked up since making that signal. "That's nice," Daniel said, stepping closer. "Emily, are you excited to see your grandmother?" The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Emily's fingers twitched slightly, but she didn't respond. Marcus quickly filled the void. "Emily doesn't talk much lately. She's been having a hard time since her mother. Well, since she's been away. Kids, you know how they are." Marcus's laugh sounded hollow, echoing strangely in the crisp morning air. Daniel crouched down to Emily's eye level, his police training kicking in. "Hi there, Emily. I'm Officer Daniel. That's a pretty sweater you're wearing." For just a moment, Emily's eyes flickered up to meet his. In that brief connection, Daniel saw something that made his blood run cold. Not just sadness, but fear. Pure, undiluted fear. And something else. Hope. The faintest glimmer of hope, as if she was silently begging him to understand what she couldn't say out loud. "We really should be going," Marcus said, his voice tighter now. "Don't want to keep grandmother waiting." As Marcus began pushing Emily's wheelchair toward the car, Daniel noticed more details that troubled him. Emily's clothes, while clean, looked like they'd been worn for days. Her wheelchair had a squeaky wheel that clearly needed attention. Most concerning of all, when Marcus touched the handles of her chair, Emily instinctively flinched. Children don't flinch from people they trust. Daniel watched as Marcus loaded Emily into the passenger seat with practiced efficiency, but no tenderness. No gentle words of reassurance, no acknowledgement of her obvious distress. Emily sat rigidly in the car seat, staring straight ahead as if she'd learned that invisibility was her best defense. As the blue sedan pulled away from the gas station, Daniel memorized the license plate number. Something was very wrong here, and every instinct he'd developed over 2 decades of police work was screaming at him to act. But act how? He had no evidence of wrongdoing, just a gut feeling and a hand signal that could be explained away as a child's random gesture. In a world where protocol mattered more than instinct, Daniel knew he was walking a thin line. Standing alone in the gas station parking lot, watching the sedan disappear around the corner, Daniel made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his notebook and wrote down every detail he could remember about the encounter. Because this time, he wasn't going to let the signs go unnoticed. This time he was going to listen to what the silence was trying to tell him. Daniel couldn't shake the image of Emily's frightened eyes as he drove back to the station. Those few seconds of eye contact had awakened memories he'd spent years trying to forget. Memories of his younger sister, Rebecca, and the signs he'd been too young to understand. Back at his desk, Daniel began what he did best: investigating. A few phone calls and database searches revealed a story that made his heart sink. Emily Rose Carter had lived happily with her mother, Sarah Elizabeth Carter, until 3 months ago when Sarah was hospitalized for what medical records described as severe exhaustion and emotional distress. During Sarah's absence, Marcus Thornfield had stepped in as Emily's temporary caregiver. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Marcus had known the family for years and had proper documentation to receive government assistance for Emily's care. But Daniel's trained eye caught inconsistencies that troubled him deeply. Marcus had been unemployed for 8 months, yet somehow qualified as a suitable caregiver. His address history showed multiple moves in the past year, and there were gaps in his employment record that raised questions. Most concerning was a note in Emily's school file indicating she'd stopped attending classes shortly after Marcus took over her care. Daniel picked up the phone and called Millbrook Elementary. "This is Officer Bridgewater. I'm checking on the attendance of one of your students, Emily Carter." The school secretary's voice grew sad. "Oh, poor little Emily. We haven't seen her since early August. Her guardian called to say she was being homeschooled now, but..." She paused. "Officer, can I speak freely? Emily was one of our brightest students. She loved learning, especially reading time. It broke our hearts when she stopped coming." That evening, Daniel sat in his small apartment, staring at a framed photo of Rebecca. His sister had been 8 when she died in what was officially ruled an accident, a fall down the stairs while staying with their uncle. But Daniel, only 15 at the time, remembered the fear in Rebecca's eyes during family gatherings, the way she'd become quiet and withdrawn. He'd noticed the signs, but hadn't understood them. No one had listened to a teenage boy's concerns about his imaginative little sister. The guilt had shaped his entire career choice, driving him to become the protector he wished someone had been for Rebecca. "I won't fail again," he whispered to the photograph, making a promise he intended to keep. The next morning brought new revelations. Daniel discovered that Sarah had been writing letters to Emily from the hospital, dozens of them. But when he checked with the postal service, none had been delivered to Marcus's address. Either they were being returned or intercepted. A call to the hospital's social services department provided more pieces of the puzzle. Sarah believed Emily was adjusting well to her temporary living situation, because Marcus had been providing regular updates about her progress. According to his reports, Emily was thriving in her new environment and looking forward to their reunion. But Daniel knew better. The little girl he'd seen at the gas station was far from thriving. As he prepared to make his next move, Daniel couldn't help but wonder how many other children were falling through the cracks of an overburdened system. How many silent signals were going unnoticed while paperwork and protocols took precedence over instinct and compassion. Emily's frightened face haunted his thoughts. But this time, he was determined to be the voice she couldn't find for herself. 3 months earlier, life for Emily and Sarah Carter had been filled with the kind of simple joy that makes childhood magical. Their small yellow house on Maple Street was more than just a home. It was a sanctuary of love and laughter. Every morning began the same way. Sarah would wheel Emily's chair up to the kitchen table where pancakes shaped like butterflies waited on a cheerful blue plate. Sarah had learned to make breakfast special, understanding that life's most precious moments often came disguised as ordinary days. "Good morning, my little sunshine," Sarah would say, kissing the top of Emily's head. "What adventure should we have today?" Emily's face would light up with possibilities. Despite being born with a condition that required her wheelchair, she'd never seen her life as limited. Sarah had made sure of that, adapting their world so Emily could explore every corner of it with confidence and joy. Their afternoons were spent in the garden behind the house, where Sarah had built raised flower beds at the perfect height for Emily's chair. Together, they'd planted marigolds, sunflowers, and Emily's favorite, purple pansies with faces that seemed to smile back at them. "Look, Mama," Emily would say, pointing to a particularly cheerful pansy. "That one looks just like you when you're happy." Sarah treasured these moments, often writing letters to Emily even though they lived in the same house. It had started as a game when Emily was learning to read, but became a tradition that bonded them even deeper. "My dearest Emily," one letter read, "Today I watched you help a butterfly find its way out of our kitchen, and I thought about how you always know how to help others find their way too. You are my greatest gift, my brightest light, and the reason I smile every day. Love, Mama." Emily kept every letter in a special box beside her bed, reading them whenever she felt sad or scared. They were proof of a love so pure and constant that it seemed impossible anything could ever threaten it. But slowly, cracks began to appear in their perfect world. Sarah worked 2 jobs to provide for them, cleaning offices early in the morning and answering phones at a doctor's office in the afternoons. The physical exhaustion was manageable, but the emotional weight of being Emily's sole caretaker while maintaining their financial stability became overwhelming. Sarah began writing different kinds of letters, ones she never intended Emily to see. "I'm failing her," she wrote in her journal. "She deserves so much more than I can give. What if I'm not enough? What if she'd be better off with someone who could provide the life she deserves?" The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday when Sarah's car broke down, causing her to miss work for the 3rd time that month. She lost both jobs within a week. Sitting in their kitchen that night, Sarah looked at Emily sleeping peacefully in her chair and made the hardest decision of her life. She needed help, professional help, to become the mother Emily deserved. "I'll be back soon, my little sunshine," she whispered, not knowing that soon would stretch into months of separation, or that the temporary guardian she'd trusted would become Emily's nightmare. If Sarah had known what lay ahead, she never would have left. But sometimes the most loving decisions lead to the most unexpected consequences. Daniel knew he couldn't handle this alone. The next morning, he contacted Rebecca Martinez, a social worker whose reputation for fierce advocacy preceded her throughout the county. If anyone could help navigate the complex system protecting children like Emily, it was Rebecca. They met at Marcus's house on Pine Street, a modest 2-story building that seemed ordinary from the outside but felt wrong the moment they approached the front door. The curtains were drawn tight, and the small front yard showed signs of neglect that suggested no one cared about maintaining appearances. "Officer Bridgewater, I presume?" Rebecca stepped out of her sedan, a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen too much. "I've reviewed Emily's file. On paper, everything appears standard, but your concerns have merit." Before they could knock, an elderly woman emerged from the house next door. Dorothy Mae Thompson, 78 years old with silver hair and worried eyes, approached them with the cautious steps of someone who'd been wanting to speak up for weeks. "Excuse me," Dorothy Mae said, her voice soft but determined. "Are you here about little Emily? Because I've been praying someone would come check on that sweet child." Daniel and Rebecca exchanged glances. "What can you tell us about Emily, Mrs. Thompson?" Rebecca asked gently. Dorothy Mae's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "That little girl used to sit in her garden every afternoon, singing songs and talking to the flowers. She had the most beautiful laugh, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. But I haven't heard her voice in weeks, haven't seen her smile either. "When did you last see her outside?" Daniel inquired. "Maybe 2 weeks ago. Mr. Thornfield keeps saying she doesn't like noise, but that child loved music. I used to play my radio by the window just to see her face light up when her favorite songs came on." When Marcus answered the door, his nervous energy was even more pronounced than at the gas station. He invited them in reluctantly, keeping his explanations short and defensive. The house felt cold despite the warm autumn weather, and Emily sat in her wheelchair by the window, wearing the same faded pink sweater from the day before. Rebecca's trained eye immediately noticed troubling details. Emily's medication sitting expired on the kitchen counter, her wheelchair's worn tires that clearly needed replacement, and the complete absence of toys, books, or anything that might bring joy to a 7-year-old's life. "Emily hasn't been very social lately," Marcus explained quickly. "The change has been hard on her mother being away and all. But Emily's behavior told a different story." When Marcus spoke, she instinctively hunched her shoulders as if trying to make herself smaller. When Rebecca knelt down to speak with her, Emily's eyes darted nervously between the adults, as if calculating whether it was safe to respond. "Hello, sweetie," Rebecca said softly. "I'm Miss Martinez. I work with children to make sure they're happy and healthy." Emily's lips moved slightly, but no sound emerged. However, when Marcus stepped out of the room to get papers Rebecca had requested, Emily did something extraordinary. She looked directly at Daniel and made the same hand signal he'd witnessed at the gas station, deliberate, desperate, and unmistakably a plea for help. This time, Dorothy May was watching from the window next door, and she saw it too. The following week brought nothing but obstacles and red tape that made Daniel's frustration boil over. Despite his report and Rebecca's concerns, the system seemed designed to protect Marcus's rights as Emily's temporary guardian rather than investigate potential problems. "You need concrete evidence," Daniel's supervisor, Captain Murphy, explained during their Monday morning meeting. "A hand gesture isn't enough to build a case on. The man has proper documentation, and technically, he's meeting his basic obligations." Rebecca faced similar resistance from her department. "I have 847 open cases," her supervisor reminded her. "Unless there's immediate danger, Emily Carter is just another file in an overstuffed cabinet." But while bureaucrats shuffled papers and cited procedures, Dorothy May Thompson was paying attention to details that mattered. She noticed Marcus leaving Emily alone for hours, while he went to places unknown. She heard Emily crying softly at night through the thin walls. Most heartbreaking of all, she witnessed Emily trying to reach the mailbox from her wheelchair, as if hoping for something that never came. Daniel's investigation revealed the missing piece of the puzzle during a visit to the post office. Emily's mother, Sarah, had been sending letters from the hospital, dozens of them filled with love and promises of reunion, but none had reached Emily because Marcus had been intercepting them. "Can I see one of those letters?" Daniel asked the postal clerk who'd been holding the returned mail. "Well, they're addressed to Emily Carter, but they keep getting returned as recipient unavailable," the clerk explained. "The man who lives there said the little girl wasn't interested in receiving mail." Daniel's hands shook as he read one of Sarah's letters. "My precious Emily, I think about you every single day. The doctors say I'm getting stronger and soon we'll be together again. I hope you're being brave and remembering how much Mama loves you. I'm writing to you every day, because even when we're apart, we're connected by love. Forever and always, Mama." The realization hit Daniel like a physical blow. Emily believed she'd been abandoned by her mother, while Sarah believed her daughter was thriving in temporary care. Marcus had created a wall of lies that kept mother and daughter apart emotionally, even as he collected benefits meant for Emily's well-being. That evening, Daniel sat in his car outside Emily's house, watching the darkened windows and wondering how many children were suffering in silence, while adults debated procedures and protocols. The little girl who'd once sung to flowers and collected letters from her loving mother was trapped in a world where her voice had been stolen, and her hope was fading. But Daniel had learned something important from his sister's tragedy. Sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules. He pulled out his phone and called Dorothy May. "Mrs. Thompson, I have an idea, but I'm going to need your help." For the first time in weeks, there was hope in the elderly woman's voice. "Officer Bridgewater, I've been waiting for someone to ask. That little girl deserves better, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes. Change was coming to Pine Street, whether the system was ready or not. The next few days revealed a pattern of behavior that made Daniel's stomach turn. During supposedly random wellness checks, he and Rebecca documented a troubling picture of Emily's daily existence. The little girl who had once been described as bright and engaging had become a shadow of herself. She sat for hours without moving, staring out the window with vacant eyes that had lost their spark. When adults entered the room, she instinctively made herself smaller, as if invisibility might protect her from whatever came next. Dorothy May had become their unofficial surveillance partner, reporting observations that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. "Yesterday, I saw Emily trying to draw something in the condensation on her bedroom window," she told Daniel during one of their quiet conversations over the fence. "But every time that Marcus fellow walked by, she'd quickly wipe it away with her sleeve." Rebecca's professional assessment was equally troubling. During a mandatory check-in, she noticed that Emily had lost weight, her already small frame appearing even more fragile beneath clothes that now hung loose. When asked about Emily's appetite, Marcus had ready explanations. "She's a picky eater," he said with practiced ease. "Always has been, according to her mother. I do my best, but you know how children can be when they're upset about changes," but the evidence suggested otherwise. Rebecca discovered that the government assistance meant to provide nutritious meals for Emily was being diverted elsewhere. The refrigerator contained mostly expired items and cheap processed foods, inappropriate for a growing child with special dietary needs. Most concerning was Emily's complete withdrawal from any form of communication. Even simple yes or no questions received no response, not even a nod or shake of the head. It was as if Emily had retreated so far into herself that she'd forgotten how to connect with the outside world. During one visit, Rebecca brought crayons and paper, hoping to engage Emily through art. For a brief moment, Emily's eyes showed interest. She picked up a blue crayon and began to draw, but the moment Marcus's footsteps echoed in the hallway, she quickly scribbled over her drawing until it was completely black. "She gets frustrated easily," Marcus explained, taking the ruined paper away. "Better not to encourage her when she's in one of these moods." But Rebecca had seen enough of the original drawing to recognize what Emily had been creating. A small house with two figures, one larger and one smaller, surrounded by flowers. It was a memory of better times, quickly hidden when the person controlling her world returned. That night, Dorothy May called Daniel with the most heartbreaking observation yet. "Officer, I heard something tonight that made me cry. That sweet child was humming, just barely audible through the walls. It was 'You Are My Sunshine,' the same song I used to hear her sing in the garden with her mama." Daniel closed his eyes, remembering Sarah's letters and the love they contained. Emily was holding on to memories of her mother through that simple song, even when everything else had been taken from her. "She's still in there, Mrs. Thompson," Daniel said softly. "We just need to find a way to reach her before it's too late." The next morning would bring a turning point, a moment when Daniel decided that following protocol was less important than following his heart. Daniel made a decision that went against everything his training had taught him about maintaining professional distance. Every afternoon at 3:30, he began parking his patrol car near Emily's house and reading children's books aloud from the front yard. The first day, there was no sign that Emily had noticed, but Dorothy May, watching from her kitchen window, reported that she'd seen a small face appear briefly behind the curtains before quickly disappearing. "I don't know what you're doing, officer," Dorothy May said, bringing him a thermos of coffee on the second day. "But I think it's working. Yesterday evening, I heard humming again." By the fourth day, the routine had evolved into something beautiful. Dorothy May joined the readings, bringing homemade cookies and sitting in her lawn chair, while Daniel read stories about brave princesses, talking animals, and children who overcame impossible odds. Other neighbors began to take notice, some pausing their daily walks to listen. Then came the breakthrough that made Daniel's heart skip a beat. On Thursday afternoon, as he read The Secret Garden, a story about a girl who found healing through friendship and hope, Emily appeared at her bedroom window, not hiding behind curtains this time, but sitting clearly visible, listening intently to every word. When Daniel reached the part where the garden began to bloom again after years of neglect, he saw Emily place her small hand against the glass. And then, in a moment that took his breath away, she made the signal again, the same silent plea for help that had started everything. But this time, she maintained eye contact with Daniel, making sure he understood that she recognized him as someone who cared. Dorothy May saw it too and had to wipe tears from her eyes. "She knows," the elderly woman whispered. "She knows you're trying to help her." That same afternoon, Rebecca arrived with news that changed everything. "I've got authorization for unannounced visits," she told Daniel as they stood in Dorothy May's driveway. "The department finally agreed that Emily's case needs more intensive monitoring." "About time," Dorothy May said firmly. "That little girl has been trapped in there long enough. When I think about how she used to laugh and sing—" Her voice trailed off, but her determination remained strong. The three unlikely allies, a police officer haunted by his past, a social worker fighting an overloaded system, and an elderly neighbor who refused to look away, had formed a protective circle around Emily. They couldn't yet pull her from her situation, but they could let her know she wasn't forgotten. That evening, as Daniel prepared to leave, he saw Emily at her window one more time. She waved, just a tiny movement of her fingers, but it was the first voluntary gesture of connection she'd made in months. "Tomorrow we read Charlotte's Web," Daniel called softly toward the window. "It's about friendship and never giving up hope." He couldn't be sure, but he thought he saw Emily nod before the curtains closed. For the first time since this journey began, Daniel felt a spark of genuine optimism. Emily was still fighting. She was still hoping, and now she knew she wasn't fighting alone. Rebecca's unannounced visits yielded discoveries that painted an even more troubling picture of Emily's situation. What they found went beyond simple neglect. It revealed a system of deception that had kept Emily isolated from everyone who loved her. The breakthrough came when Rebecca noticed a stack of unopened mail hidden beneath a pile of old newspapers. Marcus had grown careless, perhaps believing no one would look too closely at his arrangements. Among the bills and advertisements were dozens of letters addressed to Emily in Sarah's careful handwriting. "Mr. Thornfield," Rebecca said, holding up the correspondence, "can you explain why Emily's mail hasn't been delivered to her?" Marcus's practiced calm finally cracked. She gets upset when she thinks about her mother. The doctors said it might be better if she didn't dwell on the past while adjusting to her new situation. But Rebecca and Daniel both knew no doctor would recommend cutting off communication between a child and her loving parent. Marcus had been intercepting every letter, every card, every attempt Sarah had made to maintain their connection. When Rebecca opened one of the recent letters and read it aloud, the full scope of the deception became clear. Sarah's words were filled with love, hope, and specific details about her recovery progress. "My darling Emily, the doctors say I'm doing much better. I've been learning new ways to manage my feelings so I can be the strong mama you deserve. I think about our garden every day and how we'll plant new flowers together when I come home. Just a few more weeks, my sunshine." Emily had been living these months believing her mother had abandoned her, while Sarah had been led to believe her daughter was adjusting well to temporary care. Marcus had created separate realities for both of them, keeping them apart emotionally, even as he collected the benefits meant to support Emily. Further investigation revealed that Marcus's own situation was more desperate than anyone had realized. He'd lost his apartment, his job, and most of his possessions in the months before taking on Emily's care. The government assistance for her support had become his only source of income, creating a twisted incentive to keep her isolated and dependent. "He's not evil," Dorothy May observed sadly when Daniel shared what they'd learned. "He's broken, but that doesn't make what he's doing to that little girl any less wrong." The most heartbreaking discovery came in Emily's room, where Rebecca found evidence that the little girl had been trying to communicate in the only ways she could. Hidden beneath her mattress were dozens of small drawings, stick figures of a woman and child surrounded by flowers, hearts with mama written in shaky letters, and pictures of a house with a bright yellow door. Emily hadn't forgotten her mother or their life together. She'd been preserving those memories in secret, afraid that even her drawings might be taken away if discovered. That evening, Daniel sat in his car reading Sarah's letters, each one a testament to a mother's unwavering love. Sarah had been fighting her own battles in the hospital, working with counselors and doctors to become emotionally stronger for Emily's sake. She had no idea that her daughter needed rescuing from the very person who was supposed to be providing care. The next morning would bring the most crucial decision of Daniel's career, a choice between following procedures that moved at the speed of bureaucracy and taking action that could save a little girl's spirit before it was too late. Emily had been silent for too long. It was time for the adults who loved her to find their voices and speak up for what was right. Emily's condition deteriorated rapidly over the following days, as if the weight of her isolation had finally become too much for her small spirit to bear. Dorothy May's reports painted a picture that broke Daniel's heart. Emily had stopped trying to communicate entirely, barely touched her food, and spent most of her time staring blankly at the wall. "She's disappearing," Dorothy May told Daniel during one of their evening conversations. "It's like watching a little flower wilt when it stops believing the sun will ever shine again." The situation reached a crisis point when Marcus announced his intention to move with Emily to another state. "My brother lives in Nevada," he told Rebecca during what was supposed to be a routine check-in. "He's offered us a place to stay. Change of scenery might be good for Emily." Rebecca and Daniel both knew that once Emily crossed state lines, the bureaucratic maze would become even more complex. A move would reset all their progress and potentially make it impossible to reunite her with Sarah, who was nearly ready for discharge from the hospital. "We can't let that happen," Daniel said as he and Rebecca met in Dorothy May's kitchen that evening. "Emily won't survive being taken even farther from everything familiar." It was Dorothy May who provided the key insight that changed everything. "I found something today that I think you need to see," she said, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from her sweater pocket. "Emily threw this out her window this morning. I think it's meant for you, Officer Daniel." The paper contained a drawing that made Daniel's hands tremble. It showed a small figure in a wheelchair with X's over her mouth and ears, surrounded by dark scribbles. But in one corner, drawn in different, brighter crayon, was a tiny police car with a figure standing beside it. Emily had been trying to tell them that she felt silenced and trapped, but she still saw Daniel as a source of hope. It was her final attempt to communicate before giving up entirely. "This is her goodbye," Rebecca whispered, understanding the implications immediately. "She's telling us she can't hold on much longer." That night, Daniel stood outside Emily's house in the darkness, looking up at her window and remembering his sister Rebecca's face the last time he'd seen her alive. He'd been powerless then, just a teenager who didn't understand the gravity of what he was witnessing. But he wasn't powerless now. He pulled out his phone and made the call that would change everything. "Sarah, this is Officer Daniel Bridgewater. I'm calling about your daughter Emily. I think it's time you knew the truth about what's been happening while you've been away." The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of Daniel's career. Sarah's anguish at learning about Emily's condition was heartbreaking, but her determination to fight for her daughter was inspiring. "Bring me to her," Sarah said through her tears. "Whatever it takes, I need to see my little girl. She needs to know that Mama never stopped loving her, not for a single day." As Daniel hung up the phone, he looked once more at Emily's dark window. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning that was long overdue. Emily had been strong enough to survive this long. Now it was time for the adults in her life to be strong enough to save her. The little girl who had once sung to flowers deserved to find her voice again. The legal search of Emily's room, conducted with proper warrants and documentation, revealed a discovery that changed everything the adults thought they knew about the little girl's silence. Hidden beneath her mattress, wrapped carefully in an old pillowcase, was a makeshift diary that told Emily's story in her own words and pictures. Rebecca found it first, her trained eyes spotting the careful way Emily had concealed her most precious possessions. The diary wasn't a traditional book, but rather a collection of napkins, scraps of paper, and the backs of old envelopes. Anything Emily could find to record her thoughts when she believed no one was listening. "Daniel, you need to see this," Rebecca called softly, her voice filled with wonder and heartbreak. The pages were filled with simple drawings and short sentences written in a 7-year-old's careful handwriting. Mama loves me. Policeman reads stories. Want to go home. Garden has pretty flowers. Each entry was a glimpse into Emily's inner world, proving that her silence had been a choice born of fear, not inability. One drawing showed a figure in a police uniform standing next to a car, with the words, "Officer Daniel is nice," written beneath in purple crayon. Another depicted Emily and her mother working in their garden, with Miss Mama written across the top in letters that wobbled with emotion. Most revealing was a half-finished letter that Emily had been writing to her mother. "Dear Mama, I hope you come back soon. I try to be good, but I am scared. The policeman reads stories and I think he wants to help me. I remember when you read to me and we planted flowers. I love you more than all the stars. Emily." Dorothy May wiped tears from her eyes as Rebecca read the entries aloud. "That precious child has been fighting this whole time," she whispered. She never stopped hoping. But the diary revealed something else that made Daniel's detective instincts ping with new understanding. Emily's drawings showed details about her daily life that adults had missed. Times when Marcus left her alone, moments when she'd tried to reach the telephone, and attempts to open windows that had been sealed shut. She'd been documenting her own case, creating evidence in the only way a 7-year-old knew how. The final entry, written just days earlier, broke everyone's hearts. "I make the hand signal like on TV, but maybe nobody understands. I will keep trying because Mama taught me to never give up. Even when I can't talk out loud, I can still think about love." Emily had learned about the silent rescue signal from a public service announcement and had been using it deliberately, hoping someone would recognize her plea for help. Her silence wasn't resignation, it was strategy, a way to protect herself while still seeking rescue. "She's been training us," Daniel realized with amazement, "teaching us how to listen to what she couldn't say." Rebecca discovered one final treasure at the bottom of the diary collection, a photograph of Emily and Sarah in their garden, both smiling as they held a bouquet of purple pansies. On the back, in Sarah's handwriting, were the words, "My sunshine girl and her flowers that smile back at us." Emily had kept this one photo through everything, proof that love and joy had once filled her world and could again if given the chance. As they carefully packed Emily's diary for safekeeping, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced since this journey began: absolute certainty that they were going to bring Emily home. The little girl who had been forced into silence had found her voice through art, determination, and hope. Now it was time for the adults who loved her to make sure that voice was heard by everyone who needed to listen. The discovery of Emily's diary transformed everything. What had been Daniel's lonely crusade became a community mission, with allies emerging from unexpected places to form a protective circle around the little girl who had captured all their hearts. Dr. Helen Morrison, Emily's former therapist, joined the team after Rebecca shared Emily's drawings. "These pictures show remarkable emotional intelligence," Dr. Morrison explained during an emergency meeting in Dorothy May's living room. "Emily understands her situation completely and has been trying to communicate in every way she knows how." Professor James Sullivan from Millbrook Elementary arrived with a folder full of Emily's schoolwork from before Marcus took over her care. "Look at these essays," he said, spreading papers across Dorothy May's kitchen table. "Emily wrote about wanting to be a teacher someday so she could help children learn that they're special. This is not a child who had given up on the world." Even Emily's former classmates had noticed her absence. 8-year-old Tommy Patterson and his mother stopped by to deliver a card signed by Emily's entire second-grade class. "We miss Emily's stories," Tommy explained seriously. "She always made up the best adventures during recess." Dorothy May had become the unofficial coordinator of their efforts, her kitchen transformed into mission headquarters. Phone calls were made, resources gathered, and a plan developed that prioritized Emily's emotional well-being over bureaucratic convenience. The breakthrough came when Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald, a retired family court judge who lived 3 blocks away, offered her expertise. "I've been watching this situation develop," she told the group. "What that little girl needs is an emergency hearing where her voice can be heard, not through intermediaries but directly." "Can that actually happen?" Daniel asked hopefully. "With the right documentation and advocacy, absolutely," Judge Fitzgerald replied. Emily's diary provides compelling evidence that she's capable of expressing her preferences. We just need to create a safe environment where she feels protected enough to speak. Rebecca had been working behind the scenes to prepare for Sarah's discharge from the hospital. Sarah's doctors confirm she's made remarkable progress, she reported. She's learned coping strategies and has a strong support network in place. Most importantly, she never stopped fighting to get back to Emily. The team developed a careful strategy. They would request an expedited family court hearing, where Emily could be reunited with her mother in a controlled, supportive environment. Marcus would be present but supervised, ensuring Emily felt safe enough to express her true feelings. The key is patience, Dr. Morrison emphasized. Emily has been silent for months. We can't expect her to immediately return to her former talkative self. But if she feels truly safe, truly heard, I believe she'll find her voice when she's ready. Dorothy May stood up from her kitchen table, her eyes bright with determination. I've lived in this neighborhood for 45 years, she announced. I've watched children grow up, families struggle, and communities come together. I can tell you with absolute certainty that this little girl belongs with her mama, surrounded by people who understand that love is the most powerful force in any child's life. That evening, as Daniel walked through the neighborhood, he noticed something remarkable. Porch lights were on at every house on Pine Street, a silent signal that the entire community was watching over Emily. Mrs. Patterson had tied yellow ribbons around the oak trees. The Johnsons had placed a small garden of purple pansies, Emily's favorites, in their front yard. Emily wasn't just one child anymore. She had become everyone's daughter, everyone's responsibility, everyone's hope for a better tomorrow. The stage was set for the reunion that would determine Emily's future and test whether love could truly triumph over a system that had failed her so completely. The emergency court hearing took place on a crisp October morning that felt charged with possibility. Judge Patricia Williams, known for her child advocacy work, had reviewed Emily's case file and diary excerpts with the thoroughness that gave everyone hope for a fair outcome. Marcus appeared in court with a legal aid attorney, looking smaller and more defeated than Daniel had ever seen him. When confronted with the evidence of intercepted letters and Emily's deteriorating condition, he broke down completely. I never meant for things to go this far, Marcus admitted tearfully. I was homeless, desperate, and when the opportunity came to help with Emily's care, I thought I could handle it. But I was drowning in my own problems, and I made terrible choices. Judge Williams listened intently as Rebecca presented Emily's diary. Dorothy May testified about her observations, and Dr. Morrison explained the psychological impact of Emily's prolonged isolation from her mother. The turning point came when Marcus voluntarily relinquished his guardianship rights. Emily deserves better than what I can provide, he said quietly. I want her to be with her mother where she belongs. Sarah's appearance in court was emotional for everyone present. 3 months of hospital treatment had restored her strength and confidence, but the pain of separation from Emily was written clearly across her face. When she testified about her love for her daughter and her commitment to providing a stable home, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Emily is my whole world, Sarah said, her voice strong despite her tears. Every day in the hospital I work toward one goal, becoming the mother she deserves. I've learned new ways to manage stress. I have a support network in place, and I have a job waiting for me. All I want is the chance to prove that Emily belongs with me. Judge Williams made her ruling swift and decisive. Emily would be returned to her mother's custody immediately, with follow-up services to ensure a smooth transition. Marcus would receive court-mandated counseling and job placement assistance, recognizing that his actions stemmed from desperation rather than malice. The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration. Dorothy May hugged Rebecca, Daniel shook hands with Dr. Morrison, and Sarah wept with relief and gratitude. But as they prepared to leave the courthouse to collect Emily, Dr. Morrison pulled the group aside with a gentle warning. The legal victory is just the beginning, she explained. Emily has been silent for months. Trauma doesn't disappear with a judge's ruling. We need to be patient and let her heal at her own pace. When they arrived at Dorothy May's house where Emily had been staying during the proceedings, they found her sitting quietly in the garden, looking at the purple pansies that neighbors had planted. She glanced up when Sarah approached, but showed no immediate recognition or emotional response. "Hello, my sunshine," Sarah whispered, kneeling beside Emily's wheelchair. "Mama's here now. I'm never leaving you again." Emily studied her mother's face with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to trust too quickly. She didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't reach out for the embrace everyone was hoping to witness. But she didn't pull away either. "It's going to take time," Dorothy May observed gently. "That little girl has been protecting her heart for so long, she's forgotten how to let people in." As they settled Emily into Sarah's car for the drive to their new apartment, Daniel felt a mixture of triumph and concern. They had won the battle in court, but the war for Emily's spirit was far from over. The little girl who had once filled gardens with laughter was still hiding behind walls of silence, waiting to see if it was truly safe to hope again. Sarah's new apartment in the Willowbrook complex was a testament to hope and determination. During her time in the hospital, she had worked tirelessly with social services to secure a ground-floor unit with wheelchair accessibility, complete with a small patio where Emily could have her own garden space again. Every detail had been carefully chosen with her daughter in mind, from the bright yellow kitchen that matched their old home to the bedroom painted in Emily's favorite shade of lavender. But creating a beautiful home meant nothing if Emily couldn't feel safe enough to embrace it. The first few days were challenging in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. Emily moved through the apartment like a polite but distant houseguest, accepting care but offering no emotional connection. She ate the meals Sarah prepared with mechanical precision, allowed herself to be helped with daily routines, and followed instructions without complaint, but remained locked in a silence that felt impenetrable. Sarah found herself second-guessing every decision. Was the music too loud? Did Emily prefer her old bedtime routine? Should she have waited longer before bringing her home? The questions swirled in her mind as she watched her daughter sitting by the window, staring out at the world with eyes that seemed to see nothing. Dr. Morrison visited regularly, offering guidance and reassurance that kept Sarah from falling into despair. "Think of Emily's silence as a protective shell," she explained during one particularly difficult afternoon. "She's been hurt by trusting the wrong person. Now she needs time to learn that it's safe to be vulnerable again. The fact that she's accepting your care is actually a positive sign. She's testing whether you'll stay consistent." Dorothy May had become a lifeline during this transition, visiting daily with small gifts and gentle conversation that didn't require Emily to respond. She would sit beside Emily's wheelchair for hours, sharing stories about the neighborhood cats, describing the progress of flowers in her garden, and occasionally humming the lullabies she remembered from her own children's youth. "I remember when you and your mama planted those purple pansies," she would say, her voice soft and comforting. "The way you laughed when the petals tickled your nose was the sweetest sound in the world. That laugh is still inside you, sweetie. It's just resting until it feels safe to come out again." Daniel continued his story-reading visits, now taking place in Sarah's living room where Emily could listen from the safety of familiar surroundings. He had developed an impressive repertoire of adventure tales, fairy stories, and gentle mysteries that captured imagination without overwhelming sensitive emotions. Though Emily never spoke during these sessions, Sarah noticed subtle signs of engagement, a tilt of her head during exciting parts, the slight relaxation of her shoulders during peaceful moments, and occasionally, the faintest hint of interest in her eyes. Rebecca stopped by twice weekly with updates about the legal proceedings and to check on the family's adjustment. She had become more than a social worker to them. She was the advocate who had fought to bring them back together and continued to ensure their support systems remained strong. The breakthrough moment came unexpectedly on a Thursday evening when autumn shadows were growing long across the apartment floor. Sarah was sorting through Emily's belongings recovered from Marcus's house, carefully washing and organizing items that would help recreate the comfort of their former life together. Hidden in the bottom of a cardboard box, Sarah found something that made her heart stop. The entire collection of letters she had written from the hospital, still sealed in their original envelopes. Emily watched from across the room as Sarah opened one of her own letters, tears streaming down her face as she read words of love that had never reached their intended recipient. "Oh, my sweet girl," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking with the realization of what Emily had endured. "You never got any of my letters. You thought Mama had forgotten you, didn't you?" For the first time since their reunion, Emily showed a flicker of genuine emotion. Her hands moved slightly in her lap, and she leaned forward in her wheelchair as if trying to understand what her mother was holding. The careful mask of politeness slipped just enough to reveal the confused, hurt child underneath. Sarah approached slowly, holding out one of the letters with trembling hands. "These are all for you, sunshine. I wrote to you every single day, every morning when I woke up missing you, every evening when I wished I could tuck you in. I told you how much I love you and how hard I was working to come home to you." Emily's fingers trembled as she touched the envelope, recognizing her name written in her mother's familiar handwriting, the same careful script that had labeled her lunchboxes and written encouraging notes for school projects. She looked up at Sarah with eyes that held the first spark of hope anyone had seen in months. That night, Sarah made a decision that would prove to be the key to everything. She began reading her letters aloud to Emily, starting with the very first one written on the day she entered the hospital. "My dearest Emily, this is the hardest day of my life because I have to be away from you to get the help I need. But I want you to know that every breath I take, every step I take toward getting better, is for you. You are my sunshine, my reason for fighting, and my promise that tomorrow will be brighter than today." As Sarah's voice filled the quiet apartment with words of unwavering love, Emily's protective walls began to show their first cracks. She didn't speak, but she listened with an intensity that proved her heart was still capable of healing. For the first time in months, Emily fell asleep with a peaceful expression on her face. Tomorrow would bring the moment everyone had been hoping for, the day Emily would finally feel safe enough to let her voice be heard again. The morning of Emily's 8th birthday dawned bright and clear, exactly 3 months after the day she had first made that desperate signal for help at Murphy's Corner gas station. Sarah had spent weeks planning a quiet celebration, knowing that too much excitement might overwhelm her daughter, who was still learning to trust that good things could happen without being taken away. The apartment felt different that morning, charged with anticipation and love. Sarah had decorated modestly with purple streamers and a few balloons, remembering how Emily used to clap her hands with delight at birthday surprises. Now she watched carefully for any signs that the decorations might feel overwhelming rather than joyful. Dorothy May arrived early with a small purple pansy cake, decorated with tiny sugar flowers that looked just like the ones Emily and Sarah used to grow together in their old garden. "I stayed up half the night making sure these looked just right," she admitted with a proud smile. "A special little girl deserves a special cake." Daniel brought a carefully chosen gift, a new book called The Garden of Dreams, about a little girl who found her voice by talking to flowers. He had read it 3 times himself to make sure it would be encouraging rather than triggering for Emily's sensitive heart. Dr. Morrison arrived with art supplies, recognizing that Emily had always expressed herself best through drawing and creative activities. Sometimes, she had explained to Sarah, children need to paint their feelings before they can speak them. But the most important visitor was Rebecca Martinez, who brought news that would change everything. "Emily," she said gently, kneeling beside the wheelchair where Emily sat watching the gathering with cautious curiosity, "there's something very special we'd like to show you. Would you like to see what your neighbors have been working on?" They moved slowly toward the patio, giving Emily time to process each step. Sarah opened the sliding door, and they wheeled Emily outside where the entire Willowbrook community had been working in secret for weeks. The small space had been transformed into a miniature paradise that took everyone's breath away. Purple pansies, yellow marigolds, and bright sunflowers created a rainbow of color that seemed to dance in the morning light. A small fountain bubbled cheerfully in one corner, and wind chimes played gentle melodies that reminded everyone of happier times. The raised garden beds were built at the perfect height for Emily's wheelchair, ensuring she could reach every plant and flower with ease. More meaningful than the beautiful flowers was what hung from the small oak tree that had been planted in a large pot near the center of the garden. Dozens of handwritten notes from children and adults throughout the neighborhood, each one a message of welcome, love, and hope. "Welcome home, Emily. We missed your smile, You're the bravest girl we know. Can't wait to see your flowers grow. Our neighborhood is better with you in it." Emily's eyes widened as she took in the scene, her carefully controlled expression showing genuine surprise and wonder for the first time since coming home. She reached out tentatively to touch a pansy bloom, and Sarah saw her lips move slightly, though no sound emerged. It was as if Emily was trying to remember how to speak to flowers the way she used to when the world felt safe. "These flowers are here because people care about you," Sarah said softly, her own voice thick with emotion. "Everyone in our community wanted you to know that you're loved, you're safe, and you're home where you belong." Dorothy May stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Emily, sweetie, would you like to hear something extra special? Last night, I found this in my mailbox." She handed Emily a small envelope addressed in a child's careful handwriting. "To the nice lady next door, from Emily." Emily stared at the envelope as Dorothy May opened it to reveal a drawing of a purple pansy with a simple message written in purple crayon. "Thank you for caring about me when I couldn't say it out loud." The realization that her silent gesture had been received and treasured seemed to unlock something deep inside Emily's protected heart. She looked around the circle of faces, her mother's eyes bright with tears of joy, Dorothy May's gentle smile, Daniel's encouraging nod, Dr. Morrison's patient presence, Rebecca's warm expression of triumph. These were people who had fought for her, believed in her, and never given up hope even when she'd lost hope in herself. Sarah knelt beside Emily's wheelchair, taking her daughter's hands gently in her own. "Sunshine, you don't have to say anything until you're ready. But I want you to know that your voice, whether it's speaking, drawing, or just being yourself, is the most beautiful sound in the world to me. We'll wait as long as you need." Emily looked around once more at the garden that had been created with love, at the notes that proved she mattered to people she barely knew, at the faces of those who had refused to give up on her. Something shifted in her expression, a wall crumbling, a decision being made. Slowly, carefully, Emily opened her mouth. The first sound was barely a whisper, so soft that everyone had to lean closer to hear. The moment hung suspended in time, full of anticipation and hope, as Emily prepared to trust the world with her voice once again. "Mama," Emily whispered, her voice rusty from months of silence but unmistakably real, unmistakably her own. The single word hung in the morning air like magic, followed immediately by Sarah's sob of joy and Dorothy May's delighted gasp. But Emily wasn't finished. Looking directly at Daniel with eyes that now sparkled with recognition and gratitude, she spoke again. "Thank you for listening," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Thank you for reading stories and never giving up on me." And then, as if a dam had burst after holding back months of feelings, Emily began to speak. The words came slowly at first, then faster, as if she was making up for all the conversations she'd kept locked inside her heart. She talked about missing her mother every single day, about being scared but not knowing how to ask for help, about remembering their garden and hoping someone would understand her silent signals. She described listening to Daniel's stories from behind closed curtains and drawing pictures in window condensation. "I never stopped loving you, Mama," Emily said, reaching for Sarah's hands. "Even when I was afraid to talk, I kept all your love safe inside my heart. I knew you would come back because you promised, and you always keep your promises." Sarah gathered Emily into the embrace they had both been waiting for, holding her daughter close while tears of relief streamed down both their faces. "I'm never leaving you again, my sunshine," Sarah whispered. "Never, ever again." 6 months later, Emily stood before a classroom full of second graders at Millbrook Elementary, holding a small purple card in her steady hands. Her voice, once silenced by fear, now carried the confident warmth of a child who had learned that speaking up could change everything. "This is called the signal for help," Emily explained to her classmates, demonstrating the simple hand gesture that had saved her life. "If you ever feel scared or need help but can't talk out loud, you can make this sign. It means, 'Please help me,' in a way that grown-ups who care about children will understand." The children practiced the gesture solemnly, understanding that their friend Emily was teaching them something important. Mrs. Patterson watched with pride as the little girl who had once withdrawn from the world became its brave protector. After school, Emily wheeled herself to the community garden that had been built in Millbrook Park, a project inspired by her story and funded by donations from families throughout the county. Sarah worked alongside her daughter, planting new flowers and tending to vegetables they would harvest together. "Mama," Emily said one afternoon, pausing in her planting to look up at Sarah with soil-stained hands and a radiant smile, "do you think the flowers can hear us when we talk to them?" Sarah smiled, remembering the daughter who had once believed in magical conversations with pansies. "I think they hear love, sunshine. And your voice is so full of love that I'm sure they're listening to every word." Daniel continued visiting his chosen family, no longer as an investigating officer, but as someone who had proven that strangers who care can make all the difference. Dorothy May remained Emily's honorary grandmother, their friendship enriching both their lives immeasurably. As evening fell over their thriving community, Emily sat in her mother's garden reading one of the letters Sarah had written from the hospital. Letters that now served as treasured bedtime stories of hope and unconditional love. A small plaque near the community garden entrance read, "In honor of Emily Carter, who taught us that every child's voice matters, and that sometimes the most important conversations happen in silence, waiting for someone who cares enough to listen." The little girl who had once made a desperate signal in a gas station parking lot now spoke confidently about the future she was building, one conversation at a time. Her voice carried a message that resonated far beyond Millbrook's borders, that love, patience, and community could triumph over any darkness. Emily had found her voice. Now she was teaching others to find theirs too, creating ripples of courage that would spread far beyond anything she could imagine. In the purple pansies that bloomed throughout the garden, those who knew Emily's story could hear the whisper of hope itself, reminding everyone that every child deserves to be heard, protected, and loved.